Every story has two sides, the one we're told and the one that's buried deep beneath the truth. Someone's gone, questions remain, and silence is louder than ever. This is where the mystery begins.
Can you get your hair out of my milkshake?
Pick it up!
I'm driving.
Boy, when does that ever stop?
Who is she talking to, bro? Chill out.
Tim, when does that ever... Tim,
don't call me
please.
Tim either. Don't call me
No.
Tim.
When has that ever stopped you from picking your drink up?
A bombshell lawsuit and a bombshell trial. A woman sued a social media star for having an affair with her ex-husband and destroying their marriage. And while not available in every state, North Carolina actually allows people to sue for this. And wait till you hear what happened at trial, where this online influencer, who represented herself, questioned the woman suing her. This was an intense showdown that all culminated with a major verdict. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I saw this story, knew immediately we had to do it here on Sidebar. Because look, we cover, as you know, all different kinds of lawsuits: breach of contract, intentional infliction of emotional distress, assault, battery. I will tell you right now, I feel fairly confident in saying I don't think we have ever covered a lawsuit like this one before, where you have a very popular TikTok star who is being sued by a woman who claims that she essentially stole her husband from her. And believe it or not, in the law, there is an actual specific claim or claims you can sue for. I remember studying this in law school. I hadn't thought about it since then, and it was only now, when I hear about the story, that I remembered it. A few states recognize it. It's called alienation of affection, and you can also sue for something called criminal conversation, which is a claim here too. It's basically adultery. You can sue when someone has sexual intercourse with your spouse. And we're going to talk about this. This is a real thing. It is a real thing in the state of North Carolina where this is happening. So, back in May of 2024, Akira Montague filed a $3.5 million lawsuit against viral TikTok star Brene Kennard. She's got over 274,000 followers on Instagram, nearly 3 million on TikTok. Talks about her life, get ready with me videos, doing product reviews, makeup lessons, and so forth.
Hey TikTok. So I have a couple things that I got from the TikTok shop that I want to show you guys. First up, this hydrating tint. If you don't want to wear a foundation, this would be great for you. If you've had this before, heard this brand, let me know.
And sometimes she appears with her husband, Tim.
Hi, guys.
What's up, y'all? Hello?
We on here? Hey,
What's
guys.
up, y'all?
It's Renee.
It's Tim.
And now, Brene and Tim have found themselves in Akira's legal crosshairs. Akira sued for something called alienation of affection. And basically, it's alleging, you are responsible for my marriage ending. In North Carolina, which is only one of a few states that recognize this, you have to prove there was a real affection, real love between two people in a marriage. There was clear proof that a third party intentionally interfered with that marriage, and that the love, the marriage, the affection, it was destroyed, meaning the love was, quote, alienated. Is that easy to prove? Is it easy to prove in this kind of case? And you know why we're talking about this right now? Because the trial just happened. We actually just got a verdict on how all of this played out. Plus, Brene represented herself during this trial. And before we even get into the trial, back in September, got to mention this, Brene was charged with cyberstalking after Akira filed a formal complaint against her, accusing the social media star of harassing her online, showing up places, a filing saying, quote, Kennard constantly mentions my name, as well as posts my name and answers questions pertaining to my personal life and pending cases. And there was also an allegation that Brene violated a restraining order that Akira took out on her. Now, Brene was released at the time on a $2,500 bond. But when we talk about bad blood, it should also be noted that just days before Akira filed her lawsuit against Brene, there was a warrant that was issued for Akira's arrest, that she was purportedly threatening Brene by allegedly saying, I will kill you, and I will beat your bleep, and I know where you stay. This is according to the warrant. So in that criminal case, by the way, prosecutors allowed for Akira's prosecution to be deferred in exchange for 12 months of unsupervised probation, and she had to complete anger management classes and have no contact with Brene. Bad, I know. So let me bring on an attorney who specializes in family law and divorces, Randy Kessler. Randy, thank you so much for taking the time. Have you ever handled an alienation of affection case, a criminal conversation case? I mean, is this common? I know it's only in a few states. Have you ever handled anything like this?
So in a roundabout way, we certainly have. So it's only in 5 or 6 states. I practice primarily in Georgia where we don't have it, but we do have jury trials in Georgia. And so a lot of times what happens is my clients come in and say, she caused my husband to leave me. I want to bring her in. So we can't sue her in Georgia and in most states, but you can sue the spouse and say, listen, because you did this, and you can bring them in as witnesses and you can make their life uncomfortable. But the short answer is no. Very rarely, no states really have this except 5 or 6. And North Carolina being a close state to us, a lot of our clients say, well, what if I just move to North Carolina? You can't do that after the fact, but it's something we think about and talk about a lot. And we get asked the question all the time.
And my understanding, these are kind of laws that originated back in the day when it was, men still considered women property, essentially. So there's a reason you don't see this across the country. But how difficult are these claims to prove? So if you look at alienation of affection, you have to prove that there was a genuine love, affection, that there was a deliberate interference by a third party. I guess criminal conversation, you just have to prove what? That there was an affair, that there was an actual sexual intercourse going on during the course of the marriage. How difficult is this to prove, and what do you do to prove it? How do you prove it? What kind of evidence is introduced in these kinds of cases?
So there's a whole bunch of evidence, but I'm going to take a break for 1 second. We've evolved from fault divorce. You were talking about at the beginning, these laws go way back to where you had to have a reason to get a divorce. You had to prove somebody was cheating. And now in almost every state, you can get a divorce because I want a divorce. So it makes it hard to reconcile I want a divorce with pointing the finger at somebody else. So that's just to get to your first point. But as far as how hard is it to prove these cases, it's hard. You mentioned two, right? There's the alienation of affections and the criminal conversation. As I understand criminal conversation, it's what we call a strict liability case. Like if you prove that it happened, there's liability, even if the person cheating with the spouse didn't know the spouse was married. So that's an interesting one in and of itself. The other one, the bigger one, the one that they're really traveling under, the alienation of affections, is my husband left me because she made him leave me. And it's hard because most people say your husband left you because he didn't like you, or your husband went with somebody else because the relationship wasn't there. It's very hard to blame somebody else as if your spouse was not a willing participant, right? But that's what they have to do. They have to prove that the other person knew there was a marriage, that the marriage still had some viability. There's still a chance the marriage could last. It doesn't have to be a perfect marriage, but some romance, and that it caused the divorce.
And that is a key factor in this case that I want to get into, because there's a difference of opinion when you hear what came out in trial. So first of all, how did all this come about? Well, Akira alleges in the complaint that Brene and Tim started making these social media videos, this content together, while he was still married to Akira, like cooking videos, and that Akira didn't know about any of this or didn't sign off on any of this, even going so far as to allege that Brene would post pictures of Tim and the children he had with Akira, and she claims they were having an affair, that Brene was flaunting this online, that she herself found out about this alleged affair from a video of the two of them together in January of 2024. But when you go to the trial, okay, there are different versions here of the relationship, the marriage, which becomes very important from a legal point of view. And by the way, a little preview of the trial, we would learn during the trial that Brene and Tim, they apparently dated in high school, that Brene's ex-husband testified that he found out the two were trying to get back together in December of 2023, even heard them being intimate in his house in January of 2024. And the complaint also claims that Akira and Brene at one point were friends, that Brene allegedly used information that she learned from Akira about Tim, about their marriage, that she used that to seduce Tim. Now, before I get into all of that, okay, Randy, first of all, $3.5 million that she's suing for in compensatory and punitive damages. And again, we'll talk about the trial and everything that happened there, but $3.5 million in compensatory and punitive damages. Your thoughts on that number, and how do you prove that?
Oh, there's a lot there. And you had my mind working. I was listening to everything you were saying, Jesse, and talking about, I started to think, rape is a bad example, but the defense can be consent. Someone consented, and did she know about it? So there are all these defenses that are whirling through my lawyer brain. But the number, you asked me about the number. I don't know how you get to that number. One thing that lawyers always think about is collectability. Does it do a lot of good to bring a lawsuit if you can never collect it? And what's interesting here is this is one of those kind of cases where most clients, most plaintiffs don't really care as much about the number as the principle, right? They want to prove to the world that this lady caused my divorce. I'm not a bad wife. I didn't do anything wrong. It's because this outside person. I think the 3 million or 3.5 million, whatever she's seeking, it's got to be more of that, more of a, I want the world to know it's so bad that it's millions of dollars. So I don't know how else you quantify, 3.5, was my relationship worth 3.5 million? My relationship might have been worth 100 million, or it might have been worth $10. I just don't know.
But it's also pain and suffering, right? What you went through.
Yeah, but in a typical pain and suffering case, right? This, we have, how much is a lost arm worth? If you break your leg, what's the value of that? What about a damaged kidney? You can find ways to prove how much that shortens your life and the medical bills associated with it. And then you multiply the medical bills by 3 to get a pain and suffering number. I mean, there's just no real numbers game, no math in this. It's a matter of, how bad does this make you feel? And from a lawyer's point of view, it's a straight face test. What can I walk in front of a jury and say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this should be compensated to the tune of, and if I say $100 million, they're going to laugh. And if I say 100,000, they're not going to take me seriously. So $3.5 million sounds like a.
And when you're talking punitive damages, right, a way to punish the defendant for really bad, egregious acts, you wonder in a case like this, if you're accusing somebody of stealing your husband and cheating, you wonder if a jury would side or a judge would side. So I mentioned that this trial just happened and it just concluded at the Durham County Courthouse. And we're going to talk about how this all resolved. But Randy, first of all, Brene Kennard was representing herself. Were you surprised by that? And the first thing I thought about, look, if she communicates on social media in a way where she got this following, that's a useful skill in maybe getting a jury on her side, right? It was her personality, the way that she spoke, that got a lot of people to follow her. I wonder if that's useful and maybe not the worst idea for her to represent herself, even though you and I both know it's more advantageous to have a lawyer represent you.
Right. Well, I mean, there's that famous old saying, right? He who represents himself has a fool for a client. Because you just don't have the objectivity. You don't really have a chance to read the jury. And she could always testify, and she would testify, of course, on direct examination. But it's guts, it's gumption to say that I'm smart enough to be able to, convince this whole jury. But maybe that's what's in her mind. And she's got so many followers and people like her and adore her that maybe she thinks that's what's going to happen. The one skill set that most people don't have, and most lawyers don't have, and I'm still trying to figure it out, is voir dire, right? Jury selection, because you were talking about what's going on in the jury's mind. You don't know what the background of each of these jurors are. What if one of these jurors sympathizes with one side or the other? What if they were the spouse that was cheated on? Or what if they were the paramour that broke up another marriage? You really got to figure out who's deciding this case. That's a hard skill to learn, especially for a non-lawyer.
No, that's a good point. Okay, I'm going to get to the verdict, but a few points I want to mention. Now, as I mentioned, in order to prove alienation of affection, you have to show that there was a genuine, real love in the marriage. So Akira gets on the stand and testifies that there was love between her and Tim, that Tim wrote her love letters daily, that they had matching tattoos, that the relationship continued well past when Tim claimed it ended, with the two having sex regularly. And she expressed sadness on the stand that her children lost both of their parents in this whole ordeal, that her kids are on the wait list for therapy because they're, quote, going through a lot of behavioral changes. Her mother also testified that Akira and Tim were, quote, inseparable. There were texts that were apparently presented in court where Tim was planning a surprise birthday party for Akira. But then you have Tim's side of it, okay? And completely different. And Tim was called by Brene, by the way. Again, she was representing herself. He had a completely different view, that the two were more like, quote, roommates than deeply in love, even saying he was never in love with Akira, that he bought her a cheap engagement ring, that he didn't even get down on one knee when he proposed, that they were essentially in this weird living situation where they were forced to marry in order for them to stay at Tim's parents' place. He testified he never wrote those love notes, even testifying, quote, I can't even recall a time when we held hands. He testified that they fought all the time too, that he had a different timeline of when the relationship ended, saying that they separated in 2021, but Akira's mom said they were still a couple. Now, Randy, that's a big aspect here. I mean, it's trying to prove whether or not there was real love and affection in the marriage, but you also wonder, both parties testifying, are they biased in their testimony?
well, maybe she should be a lawyer, because that is the exact strategy you have to use. You have to prove that the marriage wasn't viable. There was it was not a real marriage. You didn't break up something because there wasn't anything to break up in that situation. The marriage was not a real marriage. The problem she has is that it's not a criminal trial where you have to get all 12 jurors. All you have to do is get a compromised verdict. And sometimes you're going to have some of the people saying yes, some of the people saying no, and the jury might say, I think 3 men, I think 0, and they compromise down to the middle. Something like that sometimes happens. So
now here's another part of the story that we haven't mentioned yet. Okay, so Brene was apparently staying with Akira and Tim since December of 2023, something that Akira didn't want. And although Brene claims she didn't know that Akira was uncomfortable about this, Akira's grandmother testified that she actually confronted Brene, asked her to leave the home. She claims that Brene responded saying, Akira, you better come get your grandma because I don't have a problem putting my hands on an old lady. This is, and Kennard, again, that is according to the grandmother's testimony. And apparently Tim even corroborated that there were words exchanged between the two. This is when he testified. Now, this grandmother also testified that she and Brene actually got into a pushing match. Tim denied that happening. By the way, when talking evidence, I got to mention this. Apparently there was footage that was shown to the jury, footage of Brene twerking on Tim while in a bathroom while he was married to Akira. Brene testified that she was just drunk in those clips. There was another video of Brene buying a pregnancy test after saying, I'm getting down and dirty in the sheets. There was another video where Brene apparently says, I make her very uncomfortable, so seemingly about Akira. There was reportedly a Snapchat story that was presented too, where she talked about her legal issues and said that Tim was, quote, worth it. Randy, in your opinion, how does that affect the case?
Oh boy. All right. So, we've got all the law that we've talked about and what you have to prove and picking a jury. But really what jury trials come down to, in my experience, is likability, right? You want to tell a story and you want the jury to like your side and then to figure out how can we help your side. So if this alienates the jury, if this makes the jury like or dislike one side, they're going to be more likely to bend the law or view the law as it helps their viewpoint. They want to help award damages or they want to defend the defendant and not award damages. But those are some unlikable facts. Those are the kind of things that make people say, really? You couldn't just be normal? You couldn't wait till they were divorced? You couldn't keep your hands off grandma? I mean, those are the kind of things that might hit home. There might have been someone on the jury that had an experience like that, and it just triggers something that makes them say, I don't like that person. I'm going with this side.
And from a legal point of view, it's trying to show that she deliberately interfered with the marriage, right? Now, Brene's counter argument was that she was being targeted, in this lawsuit because of her social media fame, that she wasn't the reason the marriage fell apart. Brene saying to the jury in a closing argument, quote, this was a marriage that had been falling apart for years. And that goes back to what Randy said at the beginning, trying to prove that, hey, I'm not the cause of it. Tim didn't love her. He was going to break up with her. There was things that were going on between them. I'm not the reason here. Now, it seems that the real fireworks happened in court when Brene questioned Akira on the stand. And apparently it got really tense, okay? When she questioned her, for example, about how Akira suffered a miscarriage. And Brene apparently said in court in response to that, that must have been painful for you, right? Now, the reporting from the News and Observer claims that people in the gallery actually gasped, with even a few jurors looking just shocked that she said that to Akira. And Akira reportedly responded, well, I wouldn't expect you to know since you don't have children. So the judge had to get involved here. Judge Timothy Wilson reportedly had to step in, said to Brene, you don't need to express your sympathy, and told Akira, and you don't need to make comments. At another point, when Brene questioned Akira about her blaming her for struggling in school, right, the allegation was, look what you did, you kind of ruined my life. Akira responded, I take accountability for allowing an intruder into my home. Randy, that is like, obviously there's bad blood between them, and it's very awkward and unusual to have the defendant herself questioning the plaintiff, particularly the animosity between the two. What'd you make of that?
Made for TV, right? I imagine security was doubled when they said, guess who's going to be cross-examining who? Guess who's going to be, getting to ask questions. I mean, it's almost, and again, it's a dramatic over example, but it's the rapist getting to question the victim, right? It's the person who's accused of breaking up the marriage getting to question the victim of this whole situation. It's just a terrible situation. I'm sure they were thinking things that they probably didn't say. Thank goodness they didn't say them, and I'm sure security was doubled. But that's that had to be the highlight of the trial. And if you're going to go watch a trial and you get to see something like that, that's the moment you want to see. That's the pinnacle, but for the verdict, right?
And we're going to get to the verdict in a minute. But little side note here: you mentioned security. Tim, he was arrested during the trial outside the courtroom. Yeah, he was charged with carrying a concealed 9mm handgun in the courthouse. He was actually released after posting a $2,500 bond. That's just a little side note here in this story. Anyway, okay, now let's talk about the verdict. So after reportedly almost 2 hours of deliberations, the jury came back with a verdict. And you know who they sided with? Akira. Yep, they found Brene liable for breaking up this marriage. And when it came to damages, according to the News and Observer, the judge ordered Brene to pay $1.5 million for alienation of affection and $250,000 for criminal conversation. Randy, the suit was for $3.5 million in damages. Even so, that's a pretty hefty payday when you think about that number. Let's start with the number, and then let me ask you about why you think the jury found Brene liable. Let's start with the number. What'd you make of the number?
First of all, it's incredible, right? Anything over $1 million, there's something magical. You know, every lawyer, when we go to law school, if you could get out of law school and say, I got a verdict for $1 million, that's a win, right? In almost any situation, except for when it's a, class action lawsuit. What I think happened is, and this is just my experience from juries, when I polled the jury and asked them what they did, there was usually a few extremists. Somebody that said, let's not give anything because you don't get rewarded for stuff like this. It's not a money thing. It's a family thing.
Well, here I think, by the way, I think it was the judge that determined the damages here. Yeah.
In that case, then the judge probably had the thing going on in his mind, which is, is it absolutely nothing? Is it something in the middle? I think, likability comes into play when you come up with a number, right? When it's a number that's really a figment of your imagination, there's no real concrete basis for the number. It's got to be some sort of, in your mind, okay, I didn't like what she did, but I've seen worse, and I didn't like what he did, but it's worse. It's a compromise verdict, but it sends a message that there was something that needed to be compensated, and it's a big number. It sounds like if I was just deciding who won, plaintiff won by a long shot.
And what is it? The jury didn't believe Brene's side of the story. She didn't believe Tim. They didn't believe Tim. In other words, it seems that they're saying, we talk about it in the law, but for them having, this affair, but for them getting together, this marriage would have continued between Akira and Tim. I mean, is that what their conclusion is? I mean, what do you think? Why do you think the jury found Brene liable?
I think that's the natural conclusion. Would the marriage have lasted forever? They don't have to decide that. I mean, they looked at the elements of the law. Was there this relationship? Did it interfere with the marriage? In other words, was the marriage still at all viable? And then what were the damages? They found that this marriage would have continued, but for this. It might have ended for another reason, or there might have been another relationship or another paramour, but this certain paramour caused the end of the affections. It alienated the parties from their affections for each other. They found that the law applied, and they applied the facts of the law and found that the plaintiff won.
And also, I will tell you that Robinetta Jones, who was the attorney for Akira, told this to local outlet WRAL News, quote, she has just received justice from losing her husband and the father of her children. It's just such an unusual case. I wanted to cover it from a legal point of view. This is a sad case. You're talking about a lot of emotions here, a lot of bad blood, children involved. But this has been quite the saga, to say the least. Randy Kessler, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.